Peace. This is the iconoclast, Asaya Ben Yisrael, and I'm beginning a new series which will be titled Read and Sip, or Sip and Read. I'm not too certain yet what the actual name will be, but I'm going to be reading short articles from alternative media, alternative news that's not mainstream. And I have here this delicious glass of Riscato. Whenever my mouth gets dry, I'm going to take a little sippy sip, warm the heart a little bit. I hope that this is informative. It won't be long, it'll be in quick bursts. This first article is dealing with Bill Gates and his connection to eugenics. Eugenics being connected to sterilization, being connected to population control, being connected to depopulation. But of course, you're not going to hear that in the mainstream media. So I have an article here from Top News, Australia's front line. The article headlines, The Gates Family, Eugenics, and COVID-19. What is the true story behind Bill Gates and his family? Should we trust his COVID-19 advice? That's the question being asked. Here's Mr. Gates. This article was written on April 9th, 2020. So almost a year ago. This photo's from the UN, shining the light on the Gates family. The article reads, Bill Gates, through philanthropist projects, has been positioned as a likable, mild-mannered figure who expresses his ambition to improve the health of the world through new vaccine development and technological innovation. Closer investigation reveals the Gates family has documented ties to reinvented eugenics movements of the modern age, and the work carried out by their organization shows ulterior motives contrary to saving lives. In the following, Ethan Nash examines links between COVID-19 solutions and social eugenics movements, including Bill Gates Sr. and Planned Parenthood, the Gates Foundation and philanthropy deceptions, vested vaccine interests, and engineering a pandemic. This is the background on the eugenics movement. In the late 19th century, a critical time in development of the sciences, British scholar Sir Francis Galton, in his book Inquiries into Human Faculty and Its Development, coined the term eugenics. Galton, whose cousin was Charles Darwin, hoped to better mankind, quote, better mankind, through the, quote, science of improving the human species, end quote, by selectively mating people with specific desirable hereditary traits. Decades of research on, quote, controlled breathing, end quote, including through means of sterilization, soon became accepted mainstream science at the turn of the century, and the eugenics movement was born. Supporters of eugenics believe people inherit mental illness, criminal tendencies, and even poverty, and that these conditions can be bred out of the human gene pool through forced sterilization. Not surprisingly, undesirable traits were concentrated in poor, uneducated, and minority populations. Many professionals in the scientific and biological fields rigorously research ways to improve the human race through means of eliminating these negative traits, and the movement would soon garner widespread political support, particularly in Australia. As we have explored, the likes of Professor Richard Berry and growing eugenics societies of NSW and Victoria played a pivotal role in mass campaigns for laws allowing the establishment of a, quote, lethal chamber, end quote, to euthanize what these groups called, quote, the grosser types of our mental defectives. Following World War I, numerous eugenics-based ideologies were beginning to enter mainstream societies across the world. However, after Hitler would adopt these concepts and implement an aggressive form of the concept, the world grew sour and a new change was needed to continue. I believe that's in reference to the Holocaust. The next section is headlined Cultural Marxism. Have a little sip. Pretty good. The concepts of eugenics were not exercised from Western thinking following World War II. Rather, they went underground and were reinvented by assuming more, quote-unquote, compassionate guises. Julian Huxley's significant contributions to the movement ensured that the underlying notions associated with eugenics would transform and continue into new social movements. So they realized that just outright slaughtering people was too gruesome, so they had to figure out how to do it in a more compassionate way. During the 1950s, these groups would redefine eugenics as socially progressive, with linkages to the newly formed and comprehensive welfare states that offered quote-unquote solutions to poverty and disease. The Rockefeller Foundation, Edomites, Jews, heavily financed the modern eugenics movement, and think tanks such as Tavistock Institute would give birth to many influential individuals and quote-unquote social organizations. Huxley adeptly associated the quote-unquote new and modern eugenics movement with a range of reformist ideologies, such as the popularization of birth control, the decriminalization of homosexuality, and abortion law reform. He described this process as quote-unquote eugenic modernization. So they started letting all these things happen so that people themselves would naturally do population control, or they started to market it and push it in politics and the media. And they called it eugenic modernization. The basic premise remained the same, however. It is far easier to eliminate the poor and suffering than it is to eliminate the complex and tenacious sources of their poverty or their suffering. These people believe the masses are too moronic to govern themselves. A plethora of New Age organizations and movements would arise during the era of quote-unquote counterculture, and this quote-unquote progression continued. The now notorious Gates family would soon enter the picture. So you see, it was first introduced as a means of culling the population, as a means of removing the undesirables. But at first, they went about it in a gruesome manner, and it turned the rest of the world off. But they still knew or still felt that they had to do it, because they don't want to preoccupy themselves with solving problems in poor uneducated, and minority populations. But they had to use more subtle ways, such as homosexuality, Planned Parenthood, abortion laws, sex reassignments, gender fluidity. Now, what does this have to do with Bill Gates? Well, stay tuned. In the next episode, which is going to be entitled Bill Gates Sr. and Planned Parenthood. Because eugenics seems to have been inherited, or the concept of eugenics seems to have been inherited from Bill Gates Sr. to Bill Gates. To be continued. Peace.